Let's go. Let's go. What's up, y'all? What's up? So tonight we're covering Don DeLillo's 1988 book, Libra. This is a postmodern novel. Again, this is the third Don DeLillo book that we've done. Of course, we did White Noise and we did Mal 2. And this will be our third venture into Don DeLillo. This one is different than the others, and it's interesting how things kind of tie in together because we were recently discussing the subject matter. What's up to my boy Mixky right there, my homeboy? We were recently discussing the subject matter of this book in Cormac McCarthy's book, The Passenger, which we recently covered, which delved into the Big JFK event and discussed how in that book they talked about the mob aspects of it and how it was more focused on RFK. But that being said, this book is interesting because it is a sort of anachronistic fictional account of Lee Harvey Oswald, and what led up to the big November event, the big JFK event. And I'll start it off just by reading the author's note, which is at the end of the text here. It says, "This is a work of imagination. While drawing from the historical record, I've made no attempt to furnish factual answers to any questions raised by the assassination. Any novel about a major unresolved event would aspire to fill some of the blank spaces in the known record. To do this, I've altered and embellished reality, extended real people into imagined space and time, invented incidents, dialogues, and characters." So that is kind of a disclaimer, really, about the stream as well, because, again, this is simply focusing on the book Libra by Don DeLillo, which deals with those events. Now, however, we often find that fiction and art and literature will get at the truth of an event more accurately than the factual historical record, especially considering the Joycean aspects, what Don DeLillo calls the Joycean aspects of the Warren Report. Okay, there's the dog. Okay, so hold on one second. Come on, baby. Come on. Yeah, you stay right there. Good girl. She don't like it when I start the stream, y'all. Okay, so why is the book called Libra? Well, for a number of different reasons, and this will provide a theme for us throughout the text here. But Libra this is not a stream about astrology, obviously. However, that does play into something I'm about to read in terms of the worldview of some of the characters within the book. And so Oswald is a Libran, okay, and I'm going to get into the overview of what the text is about, what the novel's about in a second. But let me read just an excerpt from you real quick. This is page 339, and this is David Ferry, who we'll get into in a minute, but who was a real historical person that is in the book involved. I'll say in the book involved in the conspiracy. And if you've seen, of course, Oliver Stone's JFK film, then he's the guy who's played by Joe Pesci in the film. But here's what it says on page 339. It says, "I've seen the fair play material you keep at 544. Fair play is the Fair Play for Cuba office, which we're going to talk about here. I've noticed something you haven't noticed. Librans never notice references to themselves. The official symbol of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee is a man's hand holding aloft a pair of scales. 2 weighing pans hanging from a rigid beam. Everywhere you go, it's all around you. Which way will Leon tilt?" Leon is the nickname, one of the many aliases, or in this case, simply a nickname that David Ferry gives him for Lee Harvey Oswald. And he's given that name because of course, Lee, and a lot of the characters in this book are uncomfortable with saying Lee, especially when he goes to Russia, or in his youth in New York. But he's nicknamed Leon because of Leon Trotsky, which is kind of an in joke with David Ferry. He says, think of two parallel lines. He said, one is the life of Lee H. Oswald. One is the conspiracy to kill the, what bridges the space between them? What makes a connection inevitable? There's a third line. It comes out of dreams, visions, intuitions, prayers, out of the deepest levels of the self. It's not generated by cause and effect like the other two lines. It's a line that cuts across causality, cuts across time. It has no history that we can recognize or understand, but it forces a connection. It puts a man on the path of his destiny. So what this is about, what this really gets at the heart of one of the themes of the book, okay, which is to say that Oswald is both a character in his own story in the text, but his own sort of greater story. It's almost like he's playing into a simulacrum for his own life in greater events of which he is unaware. And that sort of gets at the idea of the patsy, right? That there are larger events going on, and the story itself is divided into kind of these two parallel lines. We have one, which is the narrative dealing with Oswald himself, and the other is the narrative dealing with these various rogue characters who are supposedly ex-CIA. They are mercenaries, analysts, and mob figures, all these other people, including the target of this, who are all moving in this separate parallel line. But all the lines will converge in terms of the narrative, of course, at the central event. And the central event here is one of the major events of the postmodern artistic era itself, right, which is the Big JFK event. The major one being what we covered in The Passenger, which is the 1945 event, which is the singular moment when postmodernism really starts, at least in terms of an artistic era or aeon, if you want to call it that. But it's interesting that all of the postmodern work that we've covered is about essentially the T.S. Eliot wasteland, or the landscape of literature, this broken, fragmented world where characters are sort of wandering lost. But what's interesting is, and I think a lot of academics, generally don't get this in terms of their analysis of postmodernism, which is the sense of the spiritual loss. I mean, a lot do. I'm just saying from what we've delved into in the stream, many don't get at the greater metaphysical aspects of postmodernism, which is the characters wandering in their own sort of spiritual loss, due to their own free will and due to the larger events that surround them. And it's interesting that there is a conversation in the book where Lee Harvey Oswald is talking to David Ferry, and David Ferry says to him, do you believe in God? And Lee Harvey Oswald, of course, says he's an avowed atheist, he's a Marxist, says that he doesn't. And David Ferry says to him, that's ridiculous. Now, this is interesting because David Ferry is actually, if not an outright Satanist, he is probably a Gnostic. He is a sort of astrological Gnostic within the text. And he tells Lee Harvey Oswald that it's silly, it's ridiculous for him to think that he lives in this world full of these kind of evolutionary causal events. Even he says this to Oswald, and it just brings to mind the fact that a lot of postmodernism deals with these characters wandering around lost usually because of their own hubris, because of their own lack of humility. But let's get into the narrative, and a general overview of the plot. And it's interesting that it's the word plot, because the plots itself obviously play a major role in this, and there's plots within plots, plots within plots within plots. So. And then I will give you my sort of thesis about the text and about the historical events themselves and what this book does, which I've kind of hinted at already. But what the book is about is Lee Harvey Oswald from his youth, and all of the circumstances that lead up to the big event. And like I said, parallel to that, we have the other events of various characters. And we see that Oswald essentially, like, he grows up in New York. He's with his mother. He fights. He then goes down to Texas. Um, he buys. It's interesting because many of the coincidences or coincidences really are brought out in this text. And he meets David Ferry, who is he's with the Civil Air Patrol. The Civil Air Patrol, which is like an auxiliary air force in the post-World War II era, which is also contracted out obviously by CIA and various elements. And David Ferry is a creeper. He's a total creeper. And he has a number of these lads in his Civil Air Patrol, one of whom that he meets is Lee Harvey Oswald. And this really happened. Lee Harvey Oswald met him and then bought a rifle from him at age, I think, 15. And it didn't work. He was sort of sold a bill of goods, but he kind of knew what he was getting, but he just needed a firing pin in the rifle. But that's interesting because of the foreshadowing of what it plays into later. And then Oswald goes off, joins the Marines at 16. He ends up being stationed in Japan. He is thrown into the brig. He undergoes a number of various things that sort of, they don't radicalize him, so to speak, but he is somehow introduced into, as the text will say, introduced into Marxism, and then he will decide that he wants to become a Russian citizen. He gets his visa, he goes, which is very interesting. We're going to talk about that. And he gets a handler there, a guy named Alec Kirilenko. While he's there, he gets a job. His job doesn't go well. He meets a woman named Marina. They get married. Then he decides all of a sudden, you know what, this isn't for me, and he gets a visa and a return back to the United States. So he defects, and then he comes back. While he's there in Russia, he is constantly met with Marina's friends and family and various characters that he works with, and they all think that he is a spy, and that he's part of the ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, project of false defectors. And Oswald himself in the book never confirms this, but he never denies it either. And we get the hint. We sort of, if you didn't already know that is sort of where we go with the narrative, that he may be unaware himself that he is part of this program. He may be. However, various things are brought out later, especially by his mother, that hint at Monarch and MK Ultra elements, especially the loss of his hair, and which is normal for any person, right? Except for the fact that for some reason, Oswald's mother thinks that he has been through shock treatment and that he is acting totally weird. He's acting completely differently when he returns to the United States. And when he gets back, he is, by the way, when he's there, did you know that Oswald goes and tries to meet with Francis Gary Powers, the U-2 pilot? He actually is shown to his cell and looks through the window and sees him in there. He offers his assistance. Obviously, his handlers there do not trust him at all because they probably think he's part of this false defector program. And they also have their doubts about the sincerity or the genuine nature of Powers and his mission, right? They think that that American intelligence has sabotaged the plane, which mirrors Oswald because Francis Gary Powers, they ask him about him. What do they think of him? Can they sum up this man? And immediately Oswald says, "This guy doesn't know. He's a farm boy from Virginia. They probably, it's a cellular structure. He didn't know anything about the plane except that he was flying it. He knows all about planes. Why didn't he hit the self-destruct button? Why didn't he do all this stuff? Probably because, and he doesn't say this, but we get the feeling that it was probably sabotaged because they want to wreck the summit. And the people that want to wreck the summit are the same people maybe not literally the same people, but the same type of people that we meet when we go back to America in the narrative and we meet these other characters. One of whom is this character, Lawrence. Let me find his name here. This would be Lawrence. Let's see. Page 67. Let's see. We've got Lawrence Parmenter, who's he's a former leader of this group called Leader 4, which is a paramilitary group. He works with Win Everett. Win Everett is the so-called semi-retired CIA officer who is once part of the elite group called Leader 4. He decides to put the assassination into effect. We've also got a whole, like a rogue cast of characters here. Okay, Nicholas Branch. Nicholas Branch is a senior analyst for CIA who's been tasked to write a secret history of the JFK event itself, which is separate from, obviously, from the Warren Report. This is sort of contemporaneous with it, but the point of his secret history, and this is why the stream is called Theology of Secrets, because as the speaker will point out, the intelligence agencies are so deep into secrets and secrecy that it becomes this sort of religion unto itself, and all they do is uphold the theology of their own secrecy. They're loyal to this pyramidal structure, and it's so complex and so complete that even the people who are brought in, who sort of materialize like Oswald, have no awareness of the larger structure and the larger events. Even the people planning the events don't know it. And that will play in a major role when we get the mob aspects and the fictional character of this guy, Carmine Latta, who is supposed to be kind of an amalgamation of a few different characters, but he is essentially, they say at one point he's too busy running the country. And that will play into the Momo Giancana, Sam Giancana, and Santo Trafficante aspects of the Cuban sort of strand of this whole narrative. I mean, this is so complex, right? That this is one of the cornerstones of all conspiracy. And one of the things that this book does pretty brilliantly is ties the strands together, albeit it's fictional, right? But it's fictional in a way that I think that we can read this and see that there is a lot of truth in terms of the overall truth or the spirit of truth that comes out of the narrative. And again, one of those really interesting things that happens in this book is that while this character, Win Everett, who's kind of a Howard Hunt-esque character, right? He's planning the JFK event, and what it says is basically his group will they want to create a fake history of a shadowy spectral assassin character with like what they call pocket litter, right? And the pocket litter will like basically point anybody who's looking for the future in both directions. It's like the guy's one thing, but he's another thing. He's spotted here, but he's spotted there. And so nobody can ever really tie the strands together, but ultimately it will lead them back to Cuba because they want to, in the book, they want to tie the assassin back to Cuba as retaliation for CIA's own missions of assassination against Castro is the thinking. However, what happens is Oswald materializes, that's the word they use, and fits the exact profile of this character that they want. He's like the exact type of guy. And that's interesting because it is one thing that's true about this is that the research into Oswald, like again in Mark Lane's book, Plausible Denial, all of the research into Oswald always points in these paradoxical directions. It's like, okay, here he's right-handed, but here he's left-handed. He's spotted in Dallas, but at the same time he's spotted in Mexico City. He's here and he's there. He was on the 6th floor, but he wasn't. He bought a Coke, but he didn't. A cop approached him in the depository building, but it was a different guy. It's like it goes in either direction, and it's that is really brilliant about this book because, again, DeLillo is writing the book. This was published in '88. This is prior to the film JFK, and a lot like the kind of spirit of the film JFK is really inherent in this book, in that one of the natures of the conspiracy is the shadow nature or the mirrored nature of many of the major characters, the major players in this sort of, Shakespearean tragedy, right? But in real life. And he gets all of the things that we usually hear about this. Like, for instance, the idea of the national trauma, right? The thing for everyone to see. The idea of questioning, the instability that will result. The ties with the mob, and the fact that, a lot of the characters, there's a list of the three-sided. It sucks that we got to do that, but, we have to do that as much as we can for certain things. But the list of the three-sided in the book will tie in with the mob aspects because there's a code of silence and omerta built into the system already, right? So my own thesis about this and about the event is that it's not unique, obviously. But I think that, one strand people usually take, and there's no proof, right? There are strands of proof, but there's no absolute proof. And that's one of the interesting things about this. But people want to put this on the shoulders of one particular group, right? In terms of, there's the anti-Castro groups, there's the CIA, there's the Hoover group, there's the mob. They were after RFK, not JFK. It was the steel industry. It was the corporations. It was the mob because of Cuba. But I think the reality is that all of these things are working symbiotically anyway in terms of the overall power structure, and that from what we've read and from what we've seen, that in terms of the triangulation of shot that occurred in Dallas, it seems to be three separate groups all involved in one converging into one thing. Now, in the book, it talks about Alpha 66 and how Alpha 66 was a group of remember the brigade, the anti-Castro CIA contracted brigade they were contracted out of Florida, out of Miami, and trained in the Everglades. There's a lot of time in the book is spent discussing the training in the Everglades, and we've also discussed it. Remember, JD talked about this over Jay's analysis in terms of, that old boy Henry Lee Lucas. Remember Henry Lee Lucas talked about W. Senior and the Hand of Death cult training in the Everglades, and this ties into that because the things that David Ferry and Clay Shaw are interested in the book, especially there's a couple of instances which I'm going to read, really tie into the more occult aspects of what's going on. But Alpha 66 is sort of a CIA wet works, black budget, Directorate of Operations, paramilitary division that has been jaded because of the Bay of Pigs, right? Cochinos. You know what they call a hassa, Frank? It's a pig that don't fly straight. And it's determined in the book that they already have a parallel mission where they're going to do the Big JFK event themselves. They're already planning it at the time. And it was slated for Miami. Now, in the Mark Lane book, it talks about there was another one that was slated for Chicago. And that's interesting because the book, one of the movies that Oswald saw leading up to on TV, and I think this was confirmed leading up to the event, it was a late night TV movie, was the Frank Sinatra movie. Was that Suddenly? Jerry will have to confirm that one. There were two films. One was Suddenly, and the other one was, let's see, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it in my notes just right offhand. But it involves basically the same plot, but occurring from an overlook instead of the overpass, right? Where that guy James Files, have you seen those videos? claims that he was one of the guys, out of the Chicago outfit. But it parallels this. And so Guy Bannister, who is was a real person. Guy Bannister was a hard-boiled detective tied in with the Glowies, tied in with Intel, and tied in with George and Warren Shields, arms trafficking, drug trafficking, CIA, all these people. And he's one of the linchpins of this. You look for the book at least looks for these characters who sort of tie the whole thing together, and he's certainly one of these characters. George de Mohrenschildt is the other one. George de Mohrenschildt, as the book makes clear, at least in the book, was Oswald's handler. He was he met Oswald right away when he came back, and he was so-called interested in Oswald's great American short stories and his experiences of the Soviet Union. Why would he be interested? Well, George de Mohrenschildt was a banker, and his client list included, Chase Manhattan, CIA, Pentagon, this whole list of people that it says in the book again. But he's one of the people that ends up hooking him back up with David Ferrie. And another aspect of like the mirror and the mirror mirage is that, and the movie JFK is great about this, why would Oswald be this fervent Marxist handing out leaflets in New Orleans, like around the corner from the Fair Play for Cuba office, and then be handing out leaflets for the Fair Play for Cuba office? Why is he doing both? They're opposites, right? Why is he contacted by as a Glowy informant, and he gets arrested, drops the names, right, and then is not bailed out? They say, we can't bail you out. You did this. And then he's also contracted by these groups who are affiliated with the ex-Intel in the book. Right, it makes no sense. They even discuss at one point the fact that these fictional CIA guys in the book, this guy Everett and T.J. Mackey, who is kind of one of the Howard Hunt characters in the book, they had a number of different, I would say, monarchs running at the same time, who were lookalikes of Oswald, which is why we get his photograph in all these different places, like seemingly simultaneously. So it's pretty interesting. What ends up happening, of course, is that David Ferrie tells him, look, you're going to do this. You're going to take your shots. You're actually going to do this. And I would say that he was one of the corners of the triangulated, turkey shoot. And they also talk about the Mannlicher Carcano, and sort of the misunderstandings about the rifle, and all these different strands. It's a mammoth book, y'all. It's about 500 pages. It's a pretty mammoth book that, in a way, is supposed to mirror the Joycean Warren Report itself. And it even talks about the House Select Committee on Assassinations, right? And the fact that one of the things is that they confirmed that it was most probable that there was a conspiracy involved in this in the first place. By the way, speaking of Joyce, I forgot to mention in the Cormac McCarthy stream that, remember that book was the analysis of his new book on The Passenger. And it was, of course, about nuclear physics and the physicists. Did you know that, I didn't know this, that the word quark, in terms of physics, the word quark actually came from Finnegan's Wake from Joyce. Did you know that? I didn't know that he coined the term. And that's where the physicist got the name. So it's just another sort of synchro bro tie-in strand to all these aspects in the book. But David Ferrie tells him, look, you're going to take the shots or whatever, and then you're going to converge. We're all going to converge. You, and especially this guy Wayne Elko, who's one of the other shooters. Wayne Elko, I think, is there are a few. There's a guy Sanchez who I think is a sort of a cover for probably Frank Sturgis, and some of these other characters. The W Senior aspect is important because of Zapata, Project Zapata, dealing with the Operation Zapata, dealing with the Bay of Pigs itself. And did you also know, this is one of the things that I learned from the book, did you know that Oswald had attempted another event that same year on a general? Did you know that? What's his name? Irwin Walker, who was involved in the, let's say, socio-political hot movements of the early 60s. He was involved with the stuff the various riots that occurred, and that Oswald actually supposedly visited him. He did have a thing about this guy. Who knows if it was programmed or what, but he did take a shot. The guy bent over and noticed a small hole in the wall and then found bits of lead and brass in his arm. So he'd been shot at. And then later, Oswald, before the JFK event, visited him just like Palatine in Taxi Driver, right, with Travis Bickle, who's also, we would probably say, is ex-Phoenix program. Oswald is too early, obviously, for a Phoenix program, but that's not to say that he wasn't part of an MK Ultra or an early Monarch thing because of the Korean War, right? Because Frank Olson was Korean War, and this sort of came out of World War II and the Korean War. And had a 38 and was going to do it, but was told not to by Ferry and by Morenshield and various characters because there was nothing that would come out of it. The big JFK thing was their goal. That was their aim. So, Jethro says, I'm hip. No, I don't know no Iris. I don't know no Iris. Speaking of which, just as a side note, I watched The Irishman last week. I didn't watch it. Honestly, I can't, people, I don't know, you might be surprised because I know Scorsese well or whatever. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys have seen it. But I didn't watch it when it came out because I was so put off by the face swapping aspect of the film. So I finally watched it. And I thought it was pretty interesting because this actually also comes up in the film because of Jimmy Hoffa and the mob connections to that whole thing. One of the other aspects of this is something we discussed also recently with Rachel and with Jerry and with Maddie, and that was the Jolene West and Jack Ruby thing that occurred after. And Jack Ruby was mob. He was, Dixie Mafia mob, part of the Chicago outfit. He delivered envelopes for Al Capone as a youngster, and then of course died not long after. I didn't know that Jack Ruby had tried to commit the big S afterwards by ramming his head into the door of his cell. Did you know that? He claimed to hear voices, and this was, of course, after the Jolene West visit to the cell, and then he never spoke about the matter, and then died. And then in the book, it says Carmine Lotta, who again is a fictional character, but it's supposed to be a stand-in, paid him $40,000 for his tie-up. Now, that also doesn't make sense because these people were fervent anti-Kennedy family people, and yet he supposedly gets rid of him because of his great patriotism for Kennedy. It doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense in the text. Yeah, Pim says Howard Hunt on his deathbed admitted to the JFK thing. And, there are some, obviously, just like all of this stuff, there are differing opinions about the validity of that. But I would say that, Howard Hunt, was it junior or third? The third. His son recorded that. I tend to take that as truth, that I certainly think that he played a role in this. If you've read, remember we covered this when we talked about the G. Gordon Liddy book, Will. Remember we did the analysis of that. Go back to that stream because that discusses a lot of this in depth. One of those things was that Howard Hunt's son said later that when they came and took his dad, one of his dad's cover stories was that he took his children grocery shopping to a Chinese grocery store was his term, and he was like, first of all, we never went grocery shopping with Dad ever, okay, and second of all, what is he even talking about? What, a Chinese grocery store? What? And in my he said in his recollection, he was gone for the 3 days that this occurred. Now, all this stuff about the tramps and, one of them being Frank Sturgis and all that stuff, who knows? In the book, it is the two sort of covers. It is the intel guys or the ex-intel guys, the paramilitary guys that are on the grassy knoll, right? And then James Files, of course, said that him and his Chicago outfit buddy guys were in the car on the overpass. Who knows? Who knows? But I think it's interesting. And so let's talk about some of the aspects of this book. The writing is amazing because it's typical DeLillo. It's it's sort of strewn throughout with sentence fragments, which is how form and content really work together to produce meaning in this book, and that's sort of part of the overall postmodern theme or genre or motif, right? Which is even the brokenness of streams of thought and of language, but there is a kind of a shimmering beauty within the text, within the sentences, which is reminiscent in parts of White Noise. I mean, there's a scene where they go to a grocery store, and that's one of the major. That's sort of at the climax of White Noise. Speaking of which, by the way, you know that there is. Can you believe this? This is how dialed in we are, folks. That, of course, and we sort of discussed this during the White Noise stream, that there was a film in development, but it is coming out. It's being released in December. So it's like a month away from being released. Can you believe that we covered this? The book was published in 1984. I read the 1985 edition, and here we go with one of the major film productions of a Don DeLillo novel. It's pretty interesting. It stars what's his face from the new Star Wars. What's the Adam guy's name? More that guy. We get a lot of the characters, the real life characters in this book, which I appreciated, especially Clay Bertrand. Remember Tommy Lee Jones, Clay Bertrand, who is also a creeper in the JFK film, and of course David Ferry. So let's see. The book at the very beginning kind of plays on this theme without stating so. You know, the ellipsis is pretty hard and heavy in this because of obviously the conspiratorial aspects of the event. But that Oswald himself is a psychopath from a young age. It says, this is a boy who studies the lives of animals, the eating and sleeping habits of animals, the animals in their burrows and caves. What is it called? Lairs. He is advanced, Your Honor. I've said from early childhood he liked histories and maps. This is his mother. Of course, he's got this thing with his mother. Talking to a judge, trying to get him out of trouble when he's young. He doesn't fit in anywhere because he is a transplanted Southerner to the North and then vice versa. Page 12. Says, the social worker wrote, questioning elicited the information that he feels almost as if there is a veil between him and other people through which they cannot reach him, but he prefers this veil to remain intact, as if he's almost a shadow figure, right, with larger events going on outside of him into which he wants to play a role. Page 13 includes the first usage of the phrase that occurs throughout, which is, there is a world inside the world. There are a number of weird Monarch phrases that occur in this. One of which is that that occurs in the book is, quote, the Vatican is the whore of Babylon of Revelation, which occurs at weird times throughout the text. It's totally out of context in the book. This says, page 13, he liked the feeling that they were on the edge. How do we know the motorman's not insane? It gave him a funny thrill. This is what he's doing here. This sets up one of the interesting scenes in the book, which is that Oswald, as a kid, when he was in New York, liked to go down into the subway. And he would stand there and watch the trains go by and feel the magnetic, overpowering energy of trains almost careening out of control, but somehow controlled, as if he is part of events that he has no control of, right, but that are somehow still under control, and also the twin lines, right, that we discussed in the title, Libra, which David Ferry talked about, which is the twin lines of the subway somehow converging at the end, right, at a fixed point in the distance, which from the perspective of Oswald, he cannot see. But it says, he was riding just to ride. The noise had a power and a human force. The dark had a power. He stood at the front of the first car, hands flat against the glass. The view down the tracks was a form of power. It was a secret and a power. The beams picked out secret things. The noise was pitched to a fury he located in the mind, a satisfying wave of rage and pain. Never again in his short life, never in the world would he feel this inner power rising to a shriek, this secret force of the soul in the tunnels under New York. Now, it's interesting that the speaker there is discussing the soul when Oswald himself doesn't seem to believe in a soul. And yet, this is one of the great contradictions, one of the great paradoxes dealing with Oswald himself. Page 75, we're introduced to the CIA characters who are writing, again, their own secret history of JFK, because regardless of the various points we know, and the official things, we know that there is going to be a secret history that collates all of the events together, right? He says, I'm late, so could you restart from the beginning, please, BLA? Hold, please. It says, this guy is the CIA curator, and even he who is tasked with getting the information, the official information, is sometimes met with denials and shadows, even though he's working from the sort of inner sanctum of Langley itself, right? This guy's named Nicholas Branch, right? Branch, because he's one branch of the narrative here. Sometimes he looks around. The configuration of suggestive things that link and objects that link and object to its contents. He wakes up suddenly, wondering where he is. He's horrified by the weight of it all, the career of paper. He sits in the data spew of hundreds of lives. There's no end in sight. When he needs something, a report or transcript, anything, any level of difficulty, he simply has to ask. The curator is quick to respond, firm in his insistence on forwarding precisely the right document in an area of research marked by ambiguity and error, by political bias, systematic fantasy, but not just the right document, not just an obscure footnote from an open source. The curator sends him material not seen by anyone outside the headquarters complex at Langley, material that includes the results of internal investigations, confidential files from the agency's own Office of Security. This is page 15. Branch hasn't met the current curator or doubt if he ever will. They talk on the telephone, tense as snowbirds, but unfailingly polite. Fellow bookman, after all. Nicholas Branch, in his glove leather armchair, is a retired senior analyst of the CIA. Retired. Let's see. Hired on contract to write the secret history of the assassination of JFK. 6.9 seconds of heat and light. Let's call a meeting to analyze the blur. Let's devote our lives to understanding this moment, separating the elements of each crowded second. We will build theories that gleam like jade idols, intriguing systems of assumption, four-faced, graceful. We will follow the bullet trajectories backwards to the lives that occupy the shadows, actual men who moan in their dreams. Elm Street. A woman wonders why she is sitting on the grass. Blood spray all around 10th Street. A witness leaves her shoes on the hood of a bleeding policeman's car. A strangeness, Branch feels, that is almost holy. There is much here that is holy, an aberration in the heartland of the real. Let's regain our grip on things. Okay, and that ties in with the let's see, the patterns of things on page 330. I'm going to skip to page 330 here because the theme, again, it's fragmented. So on page 330, it says, David Ferry says, during the revolution, Lee said, Castro made it a point to burn his own family's cane fields. Listen to me. This Walker business is strictly in the past. You ought to forget him. A dead General Walker means nothing to Fidel. He is old hat. No one listens to Walker anymore. Your missed bullet finished him more surely than a clean hit. It left him hanging in the twilight. He's an embarrassment. He carries the stigma of having been shot at and missed. What were they looking for? Signs that exist, Ferry says. Evidence that Lee Oswald matches the cardboard cutout they've been shaping all along. You're a quirk of history. You're a coincidence. They devise a plan. You fit it perfectly. They lose you. Here you are. There's a pattern in things. Something in us has an effect on independent events. We make things happen. The conscious mind gives us one side only. We're deeper than that. We extend into time. Some of us can almost predict the time and place and nature of our own death. We know it on some deeper plane. It's almost a romance, a flirtation. I look for it, Leon. I chase it discreetly. And then on page 331, it says, men preoccupied with courage have their dark dreams. Jack's a little death-haunted, all right, but not pathologically. Not creepy-crawly like me. Poetic. That's your Jack. He's not Jack, Lee said. He knows the course. He's been close to dying several times. A brother killed in action, a sister killed in a plane crash, a baby, a Catholic gets it early. Incense, organ music. Let's see, ashes on the forehead. The best things shimmer with fear. And then again, we get this on page, let's see. We get this with the lone gunman aspect on page 386, which they mentioned by name. He was sure Oswald wanted to be the lone gunman. This is how it is with solitaries. Sorry, because I wrote over the text. This is how it is with solitaries. Men who plan eternally towards some total moment. Easy enough to make it believe it. But he would also have to make sure Oswald didn't fire until the limousine was moving away from him toward the triple underpass. TJ wanted a crossfire. That's the guy who plans the operation. This is page 386. If Oswald misses, his second shooter is in prime position. He has the car almost head on. TJ did not trust Oswald to make the shot. This was the kid who missed General Walker at 120 feet. A stationary man in a well-lighted room, and the Mannlicher is an old... unreliable weapon. If he fires and misses while the car is still off Houston Street with no clear shot for the second gunman, then we all walk away with nothing. As a shooter, Oswald was redundant, strictly backup. His role was to provide artifacts of historical interest, a traceable weapon, all the cuttings and hoardings of his Cuban career. That's what they call pocket litter. And then they're going to go to the movie house. And they went to the movie house, and one of the things that this book makes clear is that, first of all, in the book, what happens is Oswald misses the first shot, then takes, I think, 2 more shots, and one of them is the one that hits Connolly. And I think he hits Kennedy in the neck, but it's the other one, it's the other dudes who get the other shots, right? Because he's already passed. And then what happens is he goes to the movie theater. Remember, he was caught in the movie theater. He walked out the building. He was seen by cops. And that's a whole other thing that Mark Lane especially goes into, that there's something, I don't recall specifically right now, but there was something about they already knew to spot him, and the reason that, and there's another line that says that the reason that Oswald shot at the cops was because he was supposed to kill one of the other lookalikes of Oswald in the situation. And so what happened was they converged at the movie theater. They're watching like a Pearl Harbor movie, and they swarm on the movie theater, which is also odd and unusual. They swarm on the movie theater. They get there. They take Oswald out, but there's another guy in the movie theater, and one of the other guys is this guy Wayne Elko, who's a fictional character but a stand-in for somebody real. And he's not picked up because they have no idea that this is the meeting place. They think he's gone there randomly. So he stays and he watches the next film, and then he walks casually out and he's gone. He's also in the list of the suicided, which occurs, this is on pages 378 and 379. So listen to this list. This is pretty interesting. This is in the text. I'm just reading the book here. This says, Sam Giancana, the syndicate boss who grew up near Jack Ruby in Chicago, is found dead in June 1975 in his finished basement, shot once in the back of the head, 6 times in a stitching pattern around the mouth. He was scheduled to testify 5 days later before a Senate committee looking into plots against Castro. The murder weapon is found and traced to Miami. No arrest in the case. Remember, Sam Giancana is also, in the book, it claims that JFK was with, let's say, his mistress, right, a number of times. And then it says Walter Everett Jr., the man who conceived the plot, is found dead in May 1965 in a motel room outside Alpine, Texas, where he was assistant to the principal of Sul Ross State College, ruled a heart attack. He was registered as Thomas Steinbach. This fictional character, Wayne Wesley Elko, the ex-paratrooper and part-time mercenary, is found dead in January 1966 in a motel room outside Hibbing, Minnesota. Ruled acute morphine poisoning in his pickup. Police find tools and copper wiring stolen from an iron mine nearby, and a, let's say, small person asleep in the back seat. Creeper. Confirm. And then finally we get, let's see. Francis Gary Powers, FGP, the U-2 pilot, gets a job with KNBC in Los Angeles, flying a helicopter and reporting on traffic and brush fires until one day in August 1977, when the Bell Jet Ranger evidently runs out of fuel and comes yawning down in a field where boys are playing softball, killing Powers instantly. The crash occurs just 3 miles from the Skunk Works, a building with blacked-out windows at Lockheed, where the first U-2 was developed 22 years earlier. Branch has become wary of these cases of cheap coincidence. He's beginning to think someone is trying to sway him towards superstition. He wants a thing to be what it is. Can't a man die without the ensuing ritual of a search for patterns and links? The curator sends a 400-page study of the similarities between JFK's death and Lincoln's. Of course, that's also an interesting one because of John Wilkes Booth and the larger conspiracy involving that, and the order of the Order of the Golden Circle, and he was pre-Hollywood before Hollywood was the thing, right? But he's in the entertainment industry, right? John Wilkes Booth also, one of the major. I don't know if you guys have been to New York. You've ever been to Broadway? But one of the major Broadway theaters is the Edwin Booth Theater. That's his brother. And that's also interesting because John Wilkes Booth, Edwin Booth, and Junius Brutus Booth, their dad, all actors, were famous for playing in what play? Julius Caesar, also involving the same thing, right? Junius Brutus Booth playing Brutus. And then, of course, jumping down on stage, he said, Sic Semper Tyrannis, which is not in the Shakespeare play, but is what Brutus supposedly said at the moment of assassination. And we've covered that in our Julius Caesar stream that we did early on in the life of the channel. Right? Which is also on the seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Shakespeare's quoted on pages 392, 393, right? Still, it was important to be seen in an open car without a bubble top, without agents on the running boards. Here he was among them in a time of deep division. The country pulled two ways, each army raging and Jack having hold of both, right? Pulled two ways, just like Libra itself, right? The scales, the kind of scales of history that they are judging in the worldview of this book. Were there forebodings? For weeks he carried a scrap of paper with scribbled lines of some bloody Shakespearean ruin. They whirl asunder and dismember me, which is a line from Act 3, Scene 1 of King John. Also about threats to a monarch, so to speak, right? And, of course, Oswald, in my own view, being a monarch guy, monarch programmed. Shouts out to Pim out there. Pim says, BLA is such good analysis that it's a blinding torch of knowledge in the milieu of darkness. It's like sunshine in the tombs of the undead. How poetic. How poetic, especially in the parlance. Listen, folks, it's in the common parlance. Knowledge in the milieu. Thank you so much, Pim. Really appreciate that. That is so awesome. Also, shouts out. I got to give a shouts out. I don't know if I did last time, but shouts out to Victoria out there who sent a fat super chat before the last stream. $20 super chat. So thanks to Victoria out there. Appreciate you. Shouts out to all the homies out there. And if there are other super chats, if you guys please make sure that you like the stream, share the stream, share it on your Twitter and your Facebooms and your whatever, give me a like if you're watching and you haven't subscribed to this channel. If you're one of them, please hit that sub button. I appreciate it. Shouts out to all our homies out there. I started early tonight because our homeboys we got a good night of streaming tonight. Our homeboys are on there tonight, so please make sure you tune into them. Cotezie, our homeboy Cotezie will be streaming. David Patrick Harry at Church of the Eternal Logos. And shouts out, of course, to our homeboy Jay Dyer over at Jay's Analysis. He'll also be streaming tonight at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. So we'll be tuned in for those. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Really appreciate you. And again, we're doing Don DeLillo's Libra. This is our third Don DeLillo stream. Of course, we did Mal 2. That was the last one. We've done 3 Cormac McCarthy's, 3 Don DeLillo's. I think we're going to be taking a break from from postmodernism for a while, you guys. Just because we've covered a pretty, we've covered a vast range within the canon. Okay. And Mackenzie says earlier is always better for us Brits. I'm sorry about that. That was terrible. That was a terrible East End accent. But cheers. Thank you so much, Mackenzie. Appreciate you. And yes, I appreciate you being 5 hours ahead of me there. Please come back and also watch the streams if you haven't, if you got to check out early or whatever, no matter when you're watching this. I appreciate the rewatches. And yeah, we're going to be doing, we also have to do shouts out to Nico out there, wherever you are, Nico, because we're going to be doing the sponsored stream, sort of a semi-sponsored stream because it's films, right? So we'll be doing Angel Heart, starring Mickey Rourke and Robert De Niro, which we sort of touched on in the Dr. Faustus stream early on. I think that was like our second or third stream. And Strange Days, right, by Catherine Bigelow. I actually spent half the super chat, the sponsor money on the book version of Angel Heart. So we're waiting for that to come in. Because we always try to base this in text, in literature, because it's based on a book that I was unaware of. So we're going to do that. I think I just shook my camera there. Sorry, folks. All right. And we'll also be going back into Shakespeare and so forth. And if you've got any ideas for a stream to do in the future, please don't hesitate to put that in the comments afterwards, or put it here right now in the live chat. Or you can email me. My email is madmaximalism with 2 X's at gmail.com. MADMAXXIMALISM at gmail.com. And give me an idea for something you want me to cover. Or drop me a fat $100 if you want me to cover a book. And I will do that at my discretion. Give me a list maybe of things I can choose from. And I'll look at those and we can dive into it. Let's see. We also have on page 58 and 59 another list of the suicided, which would be, this says, George de Mohrenschildt, who's one of the major characters in this, who was a real-life character, as I discussed. I think in a lot of people's opinion, he is the handler of Lee Harvey Oswald. It's just too weird. He is sort of underplayed in a lot of the analyses of the Big JFK event. But George de Mohrenschildt, the multinational man, a study in divided loyalties. This is page 58 on the irrelevance of loyalty. The irrelevance of loyalty, right? The man who befriended Oswald. Irrelevance of loyalty in terms of the greater pyramidal structure of the elite in their theology of secrets that we discussed. The man who befriended Oswald dies in March 1977 in Palm Beach of a blast through the mouth with a 20-gauge shotgun, ruled a big S. 1 week later, the Miami Beach police find the body of Carlos Prio Socaras, former president of Cuba, millionaire gun runner, linked by an informer to Jack Ruby. The body sits in a chair, a pistol nearby, ruled a big S. David William Ferry, the professional pilot, amateur researcher in cancer, anti-Castro militant, is found dead in the apartment in New Orleans in February 1967, 5 days after his name is linked in the press to the assassination of the person. Natural causes, says the coroner, but some people wonder how Ferry had time to type a farewell note to a friend in the middle of a brain hemorrhage. Thus, I die alone and unloved, is his quote. Among his possessions are 3 blank passports, a 100-pound bomb, a number of rifles, bayonets, and flare guns, and a complete library of books and other materials as of that date on the Kennedy assassination, Kennedy event. Eliado Del Valle, a friend of David Ferry and head of the Free Cuba Committee, is found dead the same day in a car in Miami, shot several times in the chest at point-blank range, his head split open by an axe. No arrests in the case. Let's see. Branch, Nicholas Branch, the guy who's studying this and writing the secret history in the book, must study everything he is in too deep to be selective. Let's see. We get... Okay, Orwell's mentioned on page 100. He tried to feel... This is when Oswald is in the brig in Japan. And again, part of the being in the brig in Japan is interesting because I think that that's one of the places where, if we could ever point to it, that's one of the places where the programming occurred. Not in the brig itself, but during his time there, which the book does not really hint on. It's not really the purview of the book to go into such matters, because that sort of remains in the shadow of his character, in this sort of mirage. But that would be one of the places. It says he tried to feel history in the cell. There was history out of George Orwell, the territory of no choice. He could see how he'd been headed here since the day he was born. The brig was invented just for him. It was just another name for the stunted rooms where he'd spent his life. Because it talks about how he's always insular and he's always in small rooms. He's always in, even when he's in his own skin, he feels like he's in a cell. And that's interesting because he, of course, is in a cell in terms of his... the conspiracy aspect of this. He is in one of the cells of the operation, right? Worlds within worlds, DeLillo repeats throughout the book. History means to merge on page 101. The purpose of history is to climb out of your own skin. Didn't I just mention that with the cell, like within his own skin? He knew what Trotsky had written, that revolution leads out of the dark night of the isolated self. We live forever in history outside ego and id. He wasn't sure he knew exactly what the id was, but he knew it lay hidden in Hidel. Hidel is another one of Oswald's aliases. He goes by Hidel when he's at that point in the Marines, and at least that is what people call him. I think that, and this is one of the things that, shouts out to former Ghost. This is one of the things that the book brings attention to, which is the fact that I think many of the aliases are actually completely different people, right? They're not just him, and it's not just like a fractured mind. They are actually different people that are either posing as Oswald or posing as different, MK Delta characters. Hidel means don't tell. The id is hell. Jekyll and Hyde in their little cell, it says, page 101. Jekyll and Hyde, reinforcing the fractured psyche of this character at this time, right? And, of course, we did our Jekyll and Hyde analysis here on the channel. Page 117 is interesting because it talks about the farm. The farm, if you don't know what that is, well, the book will tell you right here. This is in the published book, which is right down the road. Not right down the road, but down the road in VA. And it says, Lawrence Parmentier booked a seat on the daily flight to the farm, the CIA secret training base in Virginia, right in Williamsburg. The flight was operated, everyone knows that. The flight was operated, I mean, that's even in that dumb A show that used to be on with the girl, what's her name? I'm not helping. Sorry, I can't remember this actress's name. It was on like one of the major networks, and it was about the people out of Quantico and which is also in Virginia, and the Glowies and their training. And then it talks about they go to Williamsburg. It was also in the movie with Colin Farrell and Al Pacino. Hey, 'cause she got up. I'm not going to say the rest. And did you notice in The Irishman that Pacino loses his Chicago accent like halfway through the film? I was talking to Jethro about that. It's pretty funny because he's playing Jimmy Hoffa and he's like, "Oh, we're gonna go there," and then like he just becomes Pacino like halfway through, right? Jethro says it's an alias with Jennifer Garner. The flight was operated under military cover and used mainly by agency people with short-term business at the base, Camp Perry. The farm was known officially by the cryptonym Isolation. The names of places and operations were a special language to the agency. Parmenter was interested in the way this language constantly found a deeper level, a secret level, where those outside the cadre could not gain access to it. It was possible to say that the closest brotherhood in the agency was among those who kept the crypt lists, who devised the keys and digraphs, and who knew the true names of operations. Camp Perry was the farm, and the farm was Isolation. And Isolation probably had a deeper name somewhere in a locked safe or some computer buried in the ground. That plays into the theology of secrets in this sort of religious, pseudo-religious structure of the brotherhood of the agency as part of the pyramid, right? It says, let's see, page 119. The U.S. Were under condition. It says foreigners attending sessions at the farm were known as black trainees. A few of them on sensitive assignments had been brought to the U.S. under conditions so secure, according to Mackey, that the men did not necessarily know what country they were in. Larry thought this was far-fetched. Look at the damn trees. You know you're in Virginia. Yep, I wrote. Yeah, you can't mistake when you're in VA. It's what we got here. Is the trees, the greenery, right? You can't. It's kind of like looking at the buildings. It's like looking at the buildings in Richmond. No matter where it's supposed to be set, that it's filmed in Richmond because of the color of the bricks. Look at the damn trees. You know you're in Virginia. But he was careful to say nothing to TJ. TJ was not to be disputed on subjects central to his interests. The false structure of reality occurs on page 125. Yes, it was also the peak of experience of Larry's career, centering on a radio station supposedly run by rebels from a jungle outpost in Guatemala. And this is one of the good aspects of that movie, The Good Shepherd, which JD covered. If you haven't seen The Good Shepherd, that's a pretty revelatory film, right? And it would be kind of like watching a film that is supposed to be set in some mythical land or in, prehistory or wherever, but it's obviously filmed in Ireland, right? It's like watching Braveheart, and it's, supposed to be the Highlands, but it's obviously filmed in Ireland. It has a color and a sheen and a glow that you don't get anywhere else. Although the two are similar, but they're not the same. It was seen as a mark of the Parmenter's sophistication that she, this is his wife, that she raked the agency in mixed company while Larry looked on grinning. This is how George de Mohrenschildt also in the book is part of a larger thing that they discuss, which is the Directorate of, I forget what it's called, the Directorate of, it's basically like how the intelligence agencies gather information from willing informants in the 60s and probably now, who are U.S. citizens within the boundaries of the country, right? And it's like this huge operation. It's like this, it's a data spew, as it says in the book. The broadcasts, now we're going back to Guatemala, which is what happened in The Good Shepherd, right? The broadcasts actually originated in a barn in Honduras, and the messages were designed to put pressure on the leftist government and arouse anxiety in the people. Rumors, false battle reports, meaningless codes, inflammatory speeches, orders to non-existent rebels. It was like a class project in the structure of reality. Larry became involved in proprietaries for a time, legally incorporated businesses, actually financed and controlled by CIA. When the agency wanted to do something interesting in Kurdistan or Yemen, it filed for incorporation in Delaware. It was during this period that he came into contact with a number of agency assets who had important holdings in sensitive parts of the hemisphere. A man from United Fruit Company, page 125. A man from the Cuban Venezuelan Oil Trust. It was George de Mohrenschildt, as a matter of fact. LOL. Merchant banks, sugar companies, arms dealers. A curious convergence of motives and holdings. Page 126, contact with wealthy and influential men was a bracing experience for someone who'd been brought up to believe in the American genius for making leaps to new levels of privilege. Being rich, he saw, was something you grew into. The agency had huge collections of intelligence on banana republics and their leaders. Larry traded secrets for pieces of promising action. He spent time in Cuba setting up transactions between the Batista government and interests in the U.S. He helped arrange mineral surveys, land development deals, drilling contracts, casino franchises. He traveled to Oriente province to learn the extent of the rebel threat to cane fields controlled by U.S. firms, etc. Talks about page 127, Gibraltar Starship provided cover for propaganda operations against Cuba. The device was Radio Swan, a transmitter stored in an oversized trailer on a remote island in the Western Caribbean. Cryptic messages from spy movies of the 40s were oftentimes thrown out there in the data spew. Attention, Eduardo, the moon is red. Romantic imagery employing the names of local wildlife. The barracuda sleeps at sundown. The shark leaves a golden trail, and so forth. Mackey would later tell Parmenter that in his LCI lying to off Blue Beach, the gibberish had the sound of a mind unraveling. And then it talks about JFK not approving air cover for Bay of Pigs, which is a nuanced issue, and which is brought up in The Devil's Chessboard, the book about Allen Dulles, and how he was never asked for air cover. And I don't know. I think it's a nuanced issue that's sort of beyond, again, the scope, beyond the scope of this particular novel. Dulles is only mentioned once in the text, so that is a completely different strand. Again, we get page 153. There's a world inside the world. As a weird sort of coded phrase within this text. This says, oh yeah, I wrote, there will be time for proof rock. This is page 162. They called him Oswaldovich when he was in Russia. He told Alec about the rumors he'd heard of a false defector program run by the Office of Naval Intelligence. It's interesting that he tells him of this when Alec already knows about it. Alec is his handler when he gets to the USSR. And it says the whole scheme was written on his mind. The other thing he didn't tell Alec concerned the false defector program. When nobody contacted him, Ozzy decided to sign up at a foreign language qualification test, Russian, just to see if he'd get noticed. And it's interesting that his handler is named Alec, because when Oswald gets back to America, one of the aliases that he goes under, that he chooses, is Alec. So he chooses the name mirroring his own handler in the Soviet Union. And we've talked about the name Alec before. It doesn't really have that much relevance to this book, except in terms of a kind of a psychic split and the occult aspects of this, which I'm about to read a couple of pages from the text, which is that, remember, Aleister Crowley changed his name from... His name was Edward Alexander Crowley. His mother called him Alec, and he didn't like the name because it was too caustic. It stuck in the throat, right? So he chose his poetical name, right, Alistair, because of that, right, forging a new identity for himself. On pages, let's see, 174 and 175, David Ferry loved a proverb. He loved the feeling of being swept into another man's aura. A power aura like Carmine's was a special state of awakening. This is so I'm about to read you who David Ferry was and what he was into, but this is interesting because it talks about the power aura of a mob character like Carmine Lotto, which is a fictional character in the text. But one of the sort of linchpin power brokers of this whole operation. The man was like a fairy tale pope, able to look at you and change your life, say a word and change your life. Ferry had devised a theology based on militant anti-communism. He was a sometime master of hypnotism. He studied languages, studied political theory, knew diseases intimately, had official records of his skill as a pilot. All this paled in the presence of a man like Carmine Lotta. Ferry believed there was a genius in this man. Carmine was born in the mid-1880s to an Italian father and a Persian mother at sea under the sign of Taurus. This was a powerful blend of elements. Ferry admired Taurians. They were a generous people, steadfast and tolerant, with a gift for empire. He carried the duffel bag to the car. He waved to the boys and drove out to the main road. Astrology is the language of the night sky. of starry aspect and position, the truth at the edge of human affairs, because he's an occultist, right? And he believes, it's one of the great contradictions. He believes like he's taking these actions towards his eventual destiny and fate, right? But the truth, dear Brutus, is not in the stars, but written in ourselves, right? He is an active agent in this, in both senses of the word. And let me read you what it says about David Ferry in our introduction to him. This says, we need an electrifying event, he says. The electrifying event is the big event, right? The national trauma, which, also, it's important to keep in mind that the Zapruder film was not, it wasn't like live, right? People didn't even know about the Zapruder film. I'm not sure if they were aware of it, but they didn't see it until a decade later. It wasn't aired on national television until the 1970s. And do you remember it was weird when they aired it? It was aired on that talk show, that Saturday Night Live guy aired it for the first time. It's weird how that came to light. But it wasn't in the public sphere for a good 10 years. Most people think this was something that people were aware of, like, at the time. He says, we want to set up an attempt on the life of this person. It points to the Cuban Intelligence Directorate. I'm devising a plan that includes elements of both the American provocation and the Cuban reply. We do the whole thing with paper, passports, driver's licenses, address books. Our team of Schusters disappears, but the police find a trail, mail order forms, a change of address card, photographs. We script a person or persons out of ordinary pocket litter. Shots ring out. The country is shocked, aroused. The paper trail leads to paid agents who have disappeared in Venezuela. I know what scientists mean when they talk about elegant solutions. And then originally in the plan, it says we don't hit the person, we miss him, which is how it changes because Oswald misses his own target first, and then later during the big event misses his target. But Oswald himself has materialized, as it says in the book, in terms of the literal, human manifestation of these plans, which is also not to say that, this is accidental. These are sort of lines converging in worlds within worlds. He reminds me, the way he's described here reminded me of a Judge Holden character, like from Blood Meridian, because David Ferry was born with that a skin disease that made him completely bald. He had no body hair. So he's just like Judge Holden. And it says, David Ferry, the investigator, bagman, and spiritual advisor, his body was 100% bald. It looked like something pulled from the earth. A tuberous stem or fungus esteemed by gourmets, but he wasn't about to give in, grow despondent, sit in a dark room drinking tasty shakes. He had some lively interests. A cure for cancer was one interest, almost a lifelong interest. He'd done research and written papers on the subject. He was interested in hypnotism and could put people into trances. Flying was a deep and abiding interest. Ferry had been a senior pilot for Eastern Airlines before his disease made him bald and before his sexual sport as a creeper became a widely known fact that Eastern officials found disconcerting. Eastern, the airline. He was interested in the communistic menace. Cuba was an interest. Moments after he put down the phone, Ferry was in the small room behind Guy Bannister's office making faces in the mirror as he adjusted the semicircular eyebrows. He was on his way to a shopping center in Jeff Parish where a model fallout shelter was on display. And he's got a radio system called ConelRad, which is intelligence. He thinks how satisfying, he thought, to live alone in a hole, not because he resembled a mutant form of life, but just to eke out extra time while all hell thundered on the surface. He earned a reward for his unlucky life. Hold on one second. Let me get the dog. Come here, baby. Come here, baby. Come here. Come here. You come sit with me. Good girl. You come over here and sit with me. That's a good girl. Yes. You stay here. Come sit with me. Come sit with me. Good. Okay, she's going to sit right here beside me. Now, one of the reasons this is interesting is, besides the inherent interest in the topic, is that David Ferry, one of the things he's interested in, at least in the text, is he has business interests in building fallout shelters. Remember, this was big booming business, triple B, during the time of Kennedy, right? And especially boomed after the Cuban Missile Crisis. The building of nuclear fallout shelters. And this plays into kind of the weird occultic aspects of the text and the I don't want to say, let's say the historical reality of a character such as David Ferry, because he represents a kind of, again, a Libran parallel line to, for instance, the Old Boy Network and the Gentleman Spies of the time, right? OSS, Donovan, even Howard Hunt with his pipe, Dulles, Helms, all these people. He's running a parallel line, but he is the sort of exact opposite. He's like a mutant character, not the exact opposite in terms of like what they represent, because they're all part of the same structure. But the mutant aspect of this tuberous, mutant Judge Holden character who lives his life as a mole in a fallout shelter because he relishes the idea of the hellish nuclear apocalypse happening on the surface, from which he can, emerge and start, this part of this kind of weird pseudo tribulation, neo-Gnostic Eden, if that makes sense. And because that reality then sort of converges with the paramilitary aspects and the anti-Castro and the mob, all through Guy Bannister and all these characters, he finds his sort of purpose going in a different line. The same sort of dark line as the other one, but in a completely different way, right? Which is the open. It's the open televised sort of white noise postmodern trauma aspect of the national trauma of seeing this event, right? One of the great cornerstones, not great, but big, you know what I mean, big, large aspects of this event and what it represents, even to this day. Clay Shaw is also one of these characters. Clay Shaw is Clay Bertrand, right, as I discussed. I think that T.J. Mackey reminds me of, it says he was last seen in Norfolk, Virginia, on page 302, and he reminds me of that Ted Shackley character, the blonde ghost, who was so-called involved in a lot of these operations. Frank's judgment was that Alpha planned to kill the big JFK. Alpha was not known for shyness or tight security. They held press conferences to announce their raids on Cuban installations and Soviet freighters. South Florida was full of Alpha members, uncounted, devout, screaming in their teeth. When Jack sent out word to get Castro, he put himself in a world of blood and pain. This is like Alpha, it says. Someone has to die, they say. That's page 303. That's a quote. And then it says on page 304, Alpha had CIA mentors. He would limit his contacts to one or two men in Alpha. They would know his real name or his position in the agency. Alpha was run like a dream clinic. The agency worked up a vision, then got Alpha to make it come true. Which is interesting. The language of dreams here, right? The dark dream aspect playing into the stars, the astrology, the occultic elements, and the dark dream in terms of their vision of the future. Oswald himself is called a negative Libran later on by Oswald. Yeah, I mentioned one of the movies that he saw on television leading up to this. It's so weird that this was on television. There were two separate movies dealing with the same theme that Oswald, that the plot was part of, right? Leading up to this, and one of those was suddenly Frank Sinatra is a combat veteran who comes to a small town and takes over a house that overlooks the railroad depot. He is there to assassinate the big guy, the big P. Numerology occurs in this, of course, with David Ferry, but it's, this with the number 18. So let me read this part. This is pages 356 and 357. It occurs to Leon that this man is KGB. So he mentions Kirilenko because he goes to the consulate in Mexico City to try to get a visa to go back to the Soviet Union, which is weird. And he mentions his handler in the Soviet Union. At least it's a name, it's a link. It also occurs to Leon that he's being photographed not only by hidden Soviet cameras, but probably the CIA cameras concealed in the building across the street or in a parked car or dangling, for all he knows, from a satellite in the sky. His room number is 18. It is almost October, and he was born on the 18th. David Ferry was born March 18th. They have sat and discussed this. The year of David Ferry's birth was 1918. It says he is a 0 in their system. And then one of the last things I'm going to read in this fairly short stream, you guys, thank you for being here with me, even though it's a long book. Oh, David Ferry calls him a night rider, which is interesting. He says, "Are you the night rider that tried to kill Walker?" And the other thing was the plots. The idea of plots. And that is, let's see. There's page 393. ZR rifle is mentioned on page 404, sort of in code, but ZR rifle, you'll have to look up that yourself, is one of the sort of Alpha 66 aspects of the conspiracy itself. And then page 422. Is this the plots? Oh, Earl Warren is mentioned on page 422. Where is the one about plots? Plots have their own, let's see. They have their own system. There's a pattern in things. We went over that. The shimmering aspects, black bag operations, the world inside the world. Page 258 mentions the psychic threat. It's the job of an intelligence service to resolve a nation's obsessions. Cuba's a fixed idea. It is prickly in a way Russia is not, more unresolved, more damaging to the psyche, and this is our job, to remove the psychic threat, to learn so much about Castro, decipher his intentions, undermine his institutions to such a degree that he loses the power to shape the way we think, to shape the way we sleep at night, is what one of the intelligence agents says. His shock treatments are mentioned on page 243, as well as the weird coded phrase about Vatican. Oh, yeah, plots. Okay, here we go, page 221. This is what I'll finish up with here. Plots carry their own logic. There's a tendency of plots to move toward death. He believed that the idea of death is woven into the nature of every plot. Do you get the parallel lines here and the anachronistic aspect of the narrative, but also the plot within a plot within a plot, right? We get the plot of the book. We get Oswald's plot. We get the plot of the plotters, right? And we get the overall plot that we're reading, and we get the plot that ties into now and why the book is relevant now. He believed that the idea of death is woven in the nature of every plot. A narrative plot is no less than a conspiracy of armed men. The tighter the plot of a story, the more likely it will come to death. A plot in fiction, he believed, is the way we localize the force of death outside the book, play it off, contain it. Do you get how that is a commentary on the writing of the book itself and the writing of the book within the book, right? Because Nicholas Branch is writing a book that's a secret book about the secret history of this thing, which is also within the Warren Report book, which is also within the larger plethora of books that we've read about this event, which is in this book. It says, The ancients staged mock battles to parallel the tempests in nature and reduce their fear of gods who warred across the sky. He worried about the deathward logic of his plot. He'd already made it clear that he wanted the shooters to hit a Secret Service man, wound him superficially, but it wasn't a misdirected round, an accidental killing that made him afraid. There was something more insidious. He had a foreboding that the plot would move to a limit, develop a logical end. And that is the conclusion of the book. That's on page 221. That is interesting because it is also the result of the plot that was discussed in terms of the moving to a limit, to a logical end of Oswald watching the trains in the subway. It's because he's a subterranean dweller, even in the start of the narrative in his life, down there with the shadowy people, watching this event take place, which he's part of, but also distant from. That also ties into David Ferry and his subterranean sort of dreams, the subterranean dreams of the plotters themselves and their visions moving in the underground with their theology of secrets, right? And the sort of shadow government, right? That is inherent within the pyramidal structure of the text, mirroring real life. So do you get how truth and facts and reality sort of converge at this fixed point within the book? It's pretty interesting. It's a great book. So we've done what I think is kind of the triptych of DeLillo books, which would be White Noise, Maltu, and Libra. All three of the books sort of are kind of about the same thing, I guess, in a pseudo, in a sort of, I guess, a quasi-metaphysical sense in terms of the loss of inherent in postmodernism, or the weird darkness that surrounds these characters in their hubris. Toledo, shouts out to Toledo out there, says, okay, because I'm a simpleton and late to the podcast, what is your theory for JFK being for that event? What was the real reason for his thing? Well, I think that's a good question. Thank you for that question. I think there are a number of different aspects that tie into this. One that I'd never considered is in the book about Dulles, The Devil's Chessboard, which is right behind me, by David Talbot. And that discusses some of the corporate interests, especially the steel industry and the raiding of the offices. And also it talks about RFK and his how the things about the MOB and how they needed them to win the election, and then they were turned on. I think that obviously the Cuba aspect plays into it, but I think that I don't know. It requires a pretty nuanced answer. I think that that a lot of this is in a way, all of these sort of strands are kind of unimportant in terms of the greater purpose, which is the moving through this sort of what they would see as the eons and the cycles of history towards the great Depop thing that they want with the great Wezet that's happening now, and of course in the future. Destabilization, the thing about the shattering the certain agency into 1,000 pieces obviously plays a major role in this. But I think one of the most important aspects is something that JD has covered, which is the great, the sort of great trauma event that occurred, right? And the sacrifice ritual aspect, right? And my theory, which comes out of all these works, is that kind of like I said at the beginning, which is that we had three big systems or strands of the Spectre octopus system all converging and working together to create this. I mean, that's in the book, right? The paramilitaries, the intel, the corporate interests, the organized crime, all of these things converging to do this one big event. If that answers that question. I know that was pretty wordy. Sorry, that was verbose. But it's hard to say because of what we can and can't say, right? But I think you get my meaning. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. Jason, our homeboy Jason out there, drops $5 and says, BLA, you keep touching on what I call the Karanka theory. The Karanka theory, in which reality is made of two co-occurring streams, facts and fictions, co-occurring videos. Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. I mean, it's a good point insofar as the video. I get it. Is the sort of parallel lines, right? And it's also interesting that the astrological elements of this, which we can watch David Patrick Harry especially to sort of explain some of this in terms of the weird, occult astrological parallel lines or worldviews that occur in some of these occult characters within the system, right? And their ideas about balance. Every movie is about that. Jay's covered that in depth in terms of the fact that every movie is about this sort of Gnostic balance that occurs, right? DJ, shouts out to DJ. DJ says, I love the X-Files take on this. Yeah, and if you guys haven't seen The Lone Gunman, I mean, pretty interesting. I think that one thing that's wild about this is that there's like variations of proof, but there's no ultimate justifying white paper proof on one linchpin thing that sums up the whole thing. Another aspect of this that I thought was interesting is something I've been talking about with Rachel, our homegirl Rachel, based homeschool mom, which is the research into I don't know how to say this. One of the things that David Ferry was interested in, which was research into fatal diseases, right? And it is interesting that this guy involved in intelligence and the occult also is interested in that. There was one more thing that I didn't mention, which was, and this is actually in the JFK movie. Remember that scene in the movie when Oswald goes to Clay Shaw's house? No, it's the Kevin Bacon character. Well, Mr. Bannister, remember in the film, and he goes to that weird ORGEE at Clay Shaw's house where David Ferry also is, and they're doing all the weird stuff, and they're dressed up like in painted gold, like as if they're part of an ancient Greek ritual. And that actually is in the book. There's a scene where he's introduced to Clay Shaw, and they talk about Clay Shaw. Clay Shaw is the guy who was he's one of the only guys that was put on the stand for this whole thing. That's the point of the film. And then he was acquitted, in 30 minutes. But I'm not sure if it was on the stand or where it was, but he mentions that it's in the text. He mentions that he has, at his house, he has black hoods, black robes, and whips and chains. And he says, oh, no, it's for Mardi Gras. That's all it is. Right. And these people are obviously into rituals, the occult, and then their obvious end, world-changing, world-affecting dark ritual that occurs in public. So that's about all I got, y'all. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here with me for this Don DeLillo stream. If you're watching this, especially if you're watching this later, come back to the stream. Give me a rewatch. Give me a like. Hit that sub button. Subscribe to my channel. Sub to all my friends out there. Go back and watch my Don DeLillo stream on white noise. That one's done pretty well. Check out the recent Mal 2 stream, which was also on cults and geopolitics. Check out the Cormac McCarthy stream on The Passenger, because that book was just published. We've covered a lot of material, we stay pretty dialed in, I got to say. I mean, I think, and covering this stuff that occurs and recurs. That's one of the points of the channel, is to discuss material in text, in the words, right? That seems the stuff that seems to pop up all the time. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate you. And I will see you in the Cotel stream. I guess Coteasy probably streaming right now at Church of the Eternal Logos. We love him. And hopefully I'll be doing that craft analysis stream with him and Rachel sometime soon. Also, you can check out my homeboy Jerry and I on Crucible. We're going to be doing another Through the Looking Glass stream, I think, this week. So that should be fun. Check out Jerry's stream at Exposing Powerful Lies live stream. We did that. He was so awesome to have us on, to have me and our homeboy Mixie over there at Tech Noir Graphics on there, and Maddie for that recent stream where we covered the Cringe Core, JD, and AJ. That was really fun. That was awesome. So go and check that out. And and thank you for supporting the channel. Thanks to everybody tonight for supporting the channel and dropping those super chats. Let me check one more time just to make sure nothing popped up on the, let's see. I just got something from Google Pay. Okay. I don't know what that is. Oh, that's just a policy thing. Shouts out to Jason, who drops $5 on PayPal. Really appreciate you, Jason. Thank you so much. Yeah. And if you want to support me anytime, don't forget, really the best way you can do that, because it gets to me right away, I don't have to wait for anything, is through Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, anytime. And next stream, I'll come back, I'll read your comments, your questions, whatever you got. Drop me some comments afterwards. Helps me with Lealgo. Thank you to everybody who leaves comments. Really appreciate y'all. And hope y'all have a wonderful night. It's getting cold out there, y'all. It's getting chilly, right? Almost Thanksgiving. So, again, we'll be back. We'll be back a couple times this week. And we'll be doing movie analyses, book analyses, and more. So thank you so much to everybody. Also, one more thing. Go to my Instagram. If you don't follow me on Instagram, Bazed Lit Analyzer at Instagram. You can catch me over there. And that's about all I got, y'all. So thank you so much. Really appreciate y'all. I think that's about it. All right, y'all. I'll see you over at Cotel, over at Coteasy. Peace.